What happens when the person who listens for a living suddenly can't hear her own life clearly anymore? What happens when a therapist, someone trained to sit calmly with grief, rage, heartbreak, and fear, finds herself lying on the floor, unable to breathe through the pain of her own breakup? Maybe You Should Talk to Someone is not a book about fixing yourself. It's a book about understanding yourself, about the stories we tell, the lies we protect, and the courage it takes to look honestly at who we are when life doesn't go according to plan. This is the story of a therapist, her therapist, and the people who walk into a therapy room believing they want relief, only to discover that what they really need is change. Part 1. Chapter 1, Idiots. Lori Gottlieb opens the story inside a therapy room, sitting across from a man named John. John is intelligent, successful, and absolutely certain that the problem in his life is everyone else. According to him, the world is overflowing with idiots. His coworkers are idiots. His wife is an idiot. The driver who stops at yellow lights is an idiot. Even the dental hygienist who asks too many questions qualifies. John has come to therapy not to understand himself, but to learn how to tolerate other people. He speaks rapidly and continuously, barely allowing Lori to interject. His complaints arrive packaged as observations, his judgments delivered with confidence and a wide, self-satisfied smile. He does not appear curious about his own role in any conflict. He is here, he believes, because the world needs fixing, not him. As Lori listens, she silently repeats a professional mantra she learned during training: have compassion. She reminds herself that there is something likable in everyone. Over time, therapists learn that even the most abrasive people are protecting something fragile beneath their defenses. But today, compassion is difficult. What John doesn't know is that Lori's own life has just collapsed. The night before this session, the man she believed she would marry abruptly ended their relationship. She is in shock, grieving, and barely functional. Between sessions, she is crying in 10-minute breaks, carefully wiping away mascara before greeting the next patient. She has not slept. Her chest aches with anxiety. And yet, she is expected to show up fully for someone else's pain. As John continues talking, Lori notices something deeply unsettling. His tone, his righteous anger, his certainty that blame lives entirely outside himself, it all feels uncomfortably familiar. She recognizes the same emotional posture in herself. She, too, is furious. She, too, is mentally calling someone an idiot. The realization hits her hard. In this moment, she and John are not so different. This recognition introduces one of the book's central ideas. The traits that irritate us most in others often mirror parts of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge. John believes his suffering is caused by external forces. Lori realizes she is doing the same. Lori reflects on a fundamental truth she has learned as a therapist. People say they want change, but what they really want is relief. Change requires loss, and loss is frightening. To change means letting go of familiar identities, defenses, and stories, even when those stories hurt. The chapter widens its scope beyond John. Lori explains that therapists are not blank slates. They are not immune to pain or confusion. They bring their own histories, vulnerabilities, and blind spots into the room. Therapy is not a one-way process. Patients affect therapists just as therapists affect patients. The chapter ends with a quiet but important shift. Somewhere across town, an older therapist named Wendell is seeing his own patients. Lori has never met him. Soon, she will. Chapter 2. If the Queen Had Balls. Lori enters therapy convinced that she just needs a few sessions to get through her breakup. Like many people, she views her pain as temporary and situational. Once she talks it through, she assumes she will feel better and return to normal. She tells the story of her relationship in loving detail. Her boyfriend was kind, attentive, emotionally available. He cared deeply for her and her young son. He talked about marriage. He showed up in ways that made her feel chosen and safe. Then one night, without warning, everything changed. He told her that he could not live with a child for the next 10 years. Lori has an 8-year-old son. The revelation lands like a blow, not only because of what he says, but because of when he says it, after years together and shared plans. The pain is compounded by confusion. How could something so fundamental never have come up? How could someone plan a future while quietly holding a deal breaker the entire time? As Lori recounts the story, She becomes aware of something she teaches patients regularly. People are unreliable narrators of their own lives. We tell stories in ways that protect us. We highlight certain details and minimize others. Her own narrative subtly shifts as she speaks, revealing how perspective shapes meaning. The chapter's title comes from a blunt phrase Laurie often uses in therapy. If the queen had balls, she'd be the king. It is her way of confronting magical thinking, the belief that happiness would be possible if reality were just a little different. People are not customizable. Love does not come a la carte. Wishing someone were fundamentally different does not make it so. Laurie is forced to face the truth that her presenting problem, the breakup, is real, but it is not the whole story. It is the doorway into deeper questions about identity, fear, control, and loss. Chapter 3. The Space of a Step. In the days following the breakup, Laurie's functioning deteriorates. She cannot sleep. She forgets simple things. Her body feels constantly on edge, as if danger is everywhere. Ordinary tasks, driving, grocery shopping, returning phone calls, feel overwhelming. She introduces a concept she often shares with severely depressed patients. When the future feels unbearable, focus only on the next step. One foot, then the other. Don't imagine the entire staircase, just the next stair. Healing, she explains, rarely arrives in dramatic moments. Most change happens through tiny, nearly invisible actions repeated over time. Survival itself becomes a form of courage. Despite her internal chaos, Laurie continues to show up for her patients. Inside the therapy room, she can temporarily set aside her own pain. Outside of it, she is unraveling. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Chapter 4. The Smart One, or the Hot One. Laurie reflects on her early career in Hollywood, where she worked first as an assistant and later as a development executive. Early on, she overheard a conversation that quietly shaped her self-image, a supervisor debating whether to hire the smart one or the hot one. Laurie was chosen as the smart one. That label followed her. It became part of her identity. She learned to equate worth with competence, insight, and usefulness. As her career advanced, she achieved what she had once believed would bring fulfillment. But something was missing. The work became social and performative, focused more on appearances than depth. She found herself disengaged, bored, and quietly unhappy. This chapter explores a common human mistake, solving the wrong problem. Laurie chased professional success when what she needed was emotional meaning. Many patients, she observes, do the same, changing jobs, relationships, or locations while avoiding deeper self-examination. Chapter 5. Namaste in bed. Julie, a young university professor, enters Laurie's practice after being diagnosed with cancer. Unlike many people around her, Julie rejects forced optimism and spiritual cliches. She does not want affirmations, mantras, or well-meaning platitudes. She wants honesty. During one session, a small moment of accidental humor breaks through Julie's despair, allowing laughter to coexist with grief. It becomes a reminder that joy and suffering are not opposites. They often live side by side. Julie's illness progresses, and the focus of therapy shifts. When death becomes unavoidable, therapy is no longer about fixing or reframing. It is about presence, about not turning away from fear. Laurie learns that the most healing thing she can offer is not wisdom or reassurance, but companionship. Chapter 6. Finding Wendell. As Laurie's emotional state worsens, friends urge her to see a therapist. Reluctantly, she agrees. She meets Wendell, an older, plain-spoken therapist with a quiet authority. Unlike Laurie, he does not intellectualize pain. He listens carefully. He interrupts gently but firmly. He notices patterns she tries to avoid. For the first time, Laurie sits on the other side of the room. She struggles with vulnerability, control, and surrender. Being the patient is far harder than being the therapist. Chapter 7. The Beginning of Knowing. Wendell begins to challenge Laurie's narrative of the breakup. He helps her see that her pain is not only about losing a partner. It is about identity, aging, fear, and the loss of imagined futures. This chapter introduces a critical insight. Understanding alone does not create change. Insight must be followed by action. Awareness without movement becomes another form of avoidance. Chapter 8. Rosie. Rosie is a young woman who believes she has terrible luck in love. Every relationship follows the same pattern: intensity, chaos, abandonment. Through therapy, Lori helps Rosie recognize a painful truth. What feels like chemistry is actually repetition. Rosie is unconsciously recreating emotional dynamics from her childhood. Healing requires breaking familiar patterns, even when they feel comfortable. Chapter 9: Snapshots of Ourselves. In this chapter, Lori explores how people carry mental photographs of who they believe they are. These snapshots are usually taken at pivotal moments in life: childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, when certain traits or behaviors helped us survive, fit in, or feel valued. Over time, these internal images harden into identity. Patients often describe themselves using outdated labels. I'm the responsible one. I'm the problem child. I'm bad at relationships. I'm the strong one who doesn't need help. These labels once served a purpose, but therapy reveals how they quietly limit growth. Lori explains that people rarely question these snapshots. They assume they are facts, not adaptations. Therapy helps patients see that they are no longer living in the moment the snapshot was taken. Updating the image allows new behaviors, choices, and possibilities to emerge. Chapter 10: The Future is Also the Present. Anxiety dominates this chapter. Lori observes how many patients live almost entirely in the future, rehearsing worst-case scenarios, postponing happiness, and delaying decisions until life feels safer or more certain. She explains that the future can feel more real than the present, especially for anxious minds. People convince themselves that once they reach a certain milestone, marriage, career stability, healing, life will finally begin. Therapy gently disrupts this illusion. Lori helps patients recognize that the future is built only through present moments. Avoiding the present does not protect people from pain, it deprives them of life. Chapter 11: Goodbye, Hollywood. Lori returns to her own story, reflecting on the deep grief she felt leaving Hollywood. At the time, she believed she was simply changing careers. In reality, she was mourning an entire identity. This chapter explores how transitions often involve invisible losses. When people change paths, they rarely grieve what they leave behind: the dreams, assumptions, and versions of themselves tied to the old life. Therapy reveals that unresolved grief doesn't disappear, it resurfaces in unexpected ways. Saying goodbye consciously allows people to move forward without dragging the past with them. Chapter 12: Welcome to Holland. Using the well-known metaphor of traveling to Holland instead of Italy, Lori explores acceptance. Many patients arrive in therapy furious that life did not turn out as planned. This chapter emphasizes that acceptance is not resignation. It does not mean liking what happened or pretending it is okay. Acceptance means acknowledging reality so that energy can be redirected from resistance to living. Lori shows how fighting reality intensifies suffering. When patients stop insisting on a different life, they can begin to notice the beauty and meaning that still exist. Chapter 13: How Kids Deal with Grief. This chapter focuses on children and loss. Lori explains that children experience grief deeply, even when they lack the vocabulary to express it. Adults often try to protect children by avoiding difficult conversations. Therapy reveals that silence creates confusion and isolation. Children sense loss whether it is named or not. Lori emphasizes that honest, age-appropriate communication helps children feel secure. Grief shared becomes grief survived. Chapter 14: Harold and Maude. Through an unconventional relationship, this chapter challenges rigid cultural ideas about age, love, and fulfillment. Patients often internalize beliefs about what relationships should look like. When reality deviates from these expectations, shame and doubt arise. Therapy helps patients examine whether these beliefs are truly theirs or inherited from society. Fulfillment, Lori argues, is deeply personal and resists simple formulas. Chapter 15: Hold the Mayo. This chapter explores resentment and unspoken expectations. Lori explains how people often assume others should intuitively know their needs. When expectations remain unspoken, disappointment becomes inevitable. Over time, small resentments accumulate, poisoning relationships. Therapy teaches patients to articulate needs clearly and tolerate the risk of rejection. Boundaries, when spoken, become acts of self-respect rather than conflict. Chapter 16: The Whole Package. Many patients enter therapy searching for perfection in partners, careers, or themselves. Lori explains how this pursuit leads to chronic dissatisfaction. People want the ideal without the inconvenience of flaws. But relationships, like people, come as complete packages. Therapy challenges patients to abandon fantasy and choose reality. Accepting imperfection does not mean settling, it means engaging with life as it actually is. Chapter 17, Without Memory or Desire. This chapter introduces a principle from psychoanalysis, approaching therapy without rigid expectations. When therapists or patients cling to specific outcomes, they limit discovery. Lori explains that real change happens when people remain open to what emerges rather than forcing insight or resolution. Letting go of memory and desire allows the therapy process to unfold organically. Healing, the chapter suggests, cannot be controlled, only invited. Part 2. Chapter 18, Fridays at 4. Part 2 opens by grounding therapy in routine. Fridays at 4 o'clock become a fixed point in time, a ritual that represents commitment, continuity, and honesty. Therapy, Lori emphasizes, is not about dramatic breakthroughs every session. It is about showing up, week after week, even when nothing feels different. For patients, this consistency becomes a container. Life outside therapy may feel chaotic, but the therapy hour remains predictable. Over time, patterns emerge, not just in what patients say, but in what they avoid, repeat, or emotionally circle without resolution. Lori begins to see how resistance often disguises itself as normal conversation. People talk around pain long before they talk into it. Fridays at 4 are not about comfort, they are about accountability. Chapter 19, What We Dream Of. Dreams take center stage in this chapter, not as mystical symbols, but as emotional messengers. Lori explains that dreams often reveal truths patients cannot yet tolerate consciously. In therapy, dreams bypass logic and defenses. They express fear, desire, grief, and longing in raw form. Even patients who dismiss dreams as meaningless often discover that their emotional reactions to the dreams tell a deeper story. This chapter reinforces a key idea: the mind speaks in many languages. When words fail, images take over. Chapter 20, The First Confession. Real therapy begins when patients tell the truth they have been rehearsing how not to say. The first confession is rarely shocking because of its content. It is powerful because of the relief that follows it. Lori describes how patients test the therapy room. They reveal small truths first, watching carefully to see if they will be judged, rejected, or misunderstood. Only when safety is established does deeper honesty emerge. Confession is not about absolution, it is about alignment. When people stop splitting themselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts, healing begins. Chapter 21, Therapy with a Condom On. This chapter explores emotional guardedness. Many patients come to therapy while keeping their deepest fears sealed off. They talk about feelings without actually feeling them. Lori compares this to intimacy with protection still firmly in place. No matter how much conversation occurs, real connection is blocked. Patients fear vulnerability because vulnerability once came at a cost. Therapy challenges them to risk emotional exposure in a controlled, compassionate space. Chapter 22, Jail. This chapter confronts the role of consequences in change. Some patients only seek therapy when external pressure forces them to legal trouble, ultimatums, or loss. Lori explains that while intrinsic motivation leads to deeper change, external consequences can still open the door. Jail, both literal and metaphorical, removes the illusion of control. Change often begins when avoidance is no longer an option. Chapter 23, Trader Joe's. Grief rarely announces itself in obvious ways. In this chapter, Lori describes how grief ambushes people in ordinary moments, standing in a grocery store, hearing a song, passing a familiar place. Trader Joe's becomes a symbol of how loss infiltrates daily life. Therapy helps patients understand that grief is not linear and not limited to designated mourning periods. Healing does not mean grief disappears. It means grief becomes integrated. Chapter 24, Hello, Family. Families enter the therapy room, whether they are invited or not. This chapter explores how family systems shape behavior, expectations, and emotional responses. Lori highlights how many adults' struggles originate in childhood roles, caretaker, peacemaker, rebel, invisible one. These roles once serve a purpose, but later become constraints. Therapy helps patients see family patterns clearly enough to choose which ones to keep and which to release. Chapter 25, The UPS Guy. Small interactions often reveal large truths. In this chapter, Lori shows how seemingly minor encounters expose deeper emotional patterns. Patients often dismiss these moments as insignificant, but therapy reveals their symbolic weight. Reactions are rarely about the present moment alone, they carry the residue of past experiences. Awareness turns overreaction into insight. Chapter 26, Embarrassing Public Encounters. Shame thrives in secrecy. This chapter explores how people go to great lengths to hide what they believe makes them unworthy. Public embarrassment triggers disproportionate emotional responses because it threatens identity. Therapy provides a space where shame can be spoken aloud and softened. When shame is named, it loses power. Chapter 27, Wendell's Mother. Wendell's personal history begins to surface. Through stories of his mother, Lori gains insight into the quiet wisdom that defines his therapeutic style. This chapter reveals that therapists are shaped by their own wounds. Wendell's calm presence is not accidental. It is earned through lived experience. The therapist, like the patient, is formed through loss, love, and endurance. Chapter 28, Addicted. Addiction is explored broadly, not just as substance dependence, but as any compulsive behavior used to avoid pain. Work, relationships, exercise, food, and distraction can all become forms of anesthesia. Lori emphasizes that addiction is not about pleasure, it is about escape. Therapy asks a frightening question: who are you without your coping mechanisms? Chapter 29, The Rapist. This chapter confronts moral complexity in therapy. Lori works with patients whose actions provoke outrage, forcing her to grapple with empathy without endorsement. Therapy, she explains, is not about condoning behavior, it is about understanding it deeply enough to prevent repetition. This chapter challenges the idea that people are either good or bad. Human behavior exists on a spectrum shaped by history, trauma, and choice. Chapter 30, On the Clock. Part 2 closes with the reality of time. Therapy sessions and whether or not resolution has been reached. Patients must leave the room and return to their lives. Time limits force honesty. They prevent endless avoidance and encourage focus. The ticking clock becomes a quiet but powerful participant in therapy. Change does not happen because there is unlimited time. It happens because time is limited. Part 3. Chapter 31, My Wandering Uterus. Part 3 opens with Lori confronting a deeply personal fear, time. As her therapy with Wendell progresses, questions about aging, fertility, and irreversible choices rise to the surface. The breakup didn't just end a relationship, it forced Lori to confront the possibility that certain futures may no longer be available to her. This chapter explores how people often grieve not only what they've lost, but what they might never have. Lori notices how anxiety tightens around imagined deadlines, especially those tied to identity and societal expectations. Wendell helps her see that panic thrives when we confuse urgency with meaning. The wandering uterus becomes a metaphor for uncertainty. Instead of rushing toward decisions fueled by fear, therapy asks Lori to slow down and examine what she actually wants versus what she feels pressured to secure. Chapter 32, Emergency Session. An emergency session disrupts the regular rhythm of therapy. Crisis pulls emotions to the surface with force and clarity. In moments like these, defenses collapse, and what matters most becomes unmistakably clear. This chapter highlights how people often grow more honest under pressure. When the illusion of control disappears, truth arrives quickly. Lori observes that emergencies don't create new problems, they expose existing ones. Therapy in crisis is not about perfect insight. It is about stabilization, presence, and helping someone regain enough footing to keep going. Chapter 33, Karma. The idea of karma enters therapy not as a mystical force, but as a psychological reckoning. Patients often ask why bad things keep happening to them, framing life as something that is done to them. Lori examines how responsibility differs from blame. Taking responsibility does not mean shaming oneself, it means recognizing patterns and reclaiming agency. When people stop asking, why me, and start asking, what now, change becomes possible. Chapter 34, Just Be. Stillness is deeply uncomfortable for many people. In this chapter, Lori explores how patients fill silence with activity, explanation, or distraction to avoid feeling. Just be sounds simple, but it requires tolerating uncertainty and emotional exposure. Therapy invites patients to sit with discomfort long enough for meaning to emerge. For Lori, learning to stop performing, even in therapy, becomes a turning point. Presence replaces productivity. Chapter 35, Would You Rather? Choice becomes the central theme here. Patients often present false dilemmas, believing they must choose between two equally painful outcomes. Lori shows how reframing choices can dissolve paralysis. Avoidance is also a choice, one that quietly shapes identity over time. This chapter reinforces a recurring truth: the decisions we delay often decide for us. Chapter 36, The Speed of Want. Desire creates urgency. Patients often believe that wanting something intensely means they must act immediately. Lori challenges this assumption. Urgency, she explains, is often anxiety in disguise. Therapy helps slow desire down so it can be examined rather than obeyed. When people learn to distinguish between impulse and intention, they regain control over their lives. Chapter 37, Ultimate Concerns. This chapter draws from existential psychology, focusing on 4 unavoidable human realities: death, freedom, isolation, and meaning. Lori reflects on how many patient struggles are rooted in avoiding these truths. Therapy doesn't remove existential anxiety, it helps people live alongside it with honesty. Wendell encourages Lori to stop seeking certainty and instead build tolerance for ambiguity. Chapter 38, Legoland. A seemingly light chapter reveals a profound insight: joy and grief are not mutually exclusive. A trip to Legoland becomes a reminder that moments of happiness can exist even in the shadow of pain. Many patients feel guilty for experiencing joy during difficult times. Lori reframes this belief, showing that allowing joy is not a betrayal of grief, it is a necessary counterbalance. Chapter 39, How Humans Change. Change, Lori explains, does not happen through insight alone. It requires repeated action, discomfort, and patience. People often expect therapy to deliver transformation quickly. This chapter dismantles that myth, emphasizing that lasting change is incremental and nonlinear. Therapy works not by erasing old patterns, but by making new responses possible. Chapter 40, Fathers. This chapter explores how relationships with fathers shape self-worth, authority, and emotional expression. Lori observes how unresolved parental dynamics echo into adult relationships. Therapy allows patients to grieve what they didn't receive without remaining trapped by it. Understanding the past becomes a way to loosen its grip on the present. Chapter 41, Integrity versus Despair. Here, Lori contrasts 2 paths: living in alignment with one's values or sinking into quiet despair. Integrity, she explains, is not about perfection, it is about honesty. When people betray themselves repeatedly, despair follows. Therapy helps patients identify where they have compromised themselves and how to begin repairing that relationship. Chapter 42, My Neshama. The concept of a soul, neshama, enters the narrative. This chapter is about reconnecting with what feels most authentic and alive. For Lori, this means letting go of performance and reclaiming vulnerability. Therapy becomes less about fixing and more about remembering who she is. Chapter 43, What Not to Say to a Dying Person. This chapter addresses society's discomfort with death. Well-meaning people often fill silence with platitudes that distance rather than comfort. Lori explains that presence matters more than words. Sitting with someone's fear without trying to erase, it is one of the most profound acts of care. Chapter 44, Boyfriend's Email. The past resurfaces when Lori receives an email from her ex. Instead of closure, it brings clarity. She realizes that healing does not depend on the other person's understanding or apology. Closure is an internal process. This moment marks a shift from longing to acceptance. Chapter 45, Wendell's Beard. Part 3 closes with a symbolic change. Wendell shaves his beard, subtly revealing that even therapists evolve. Change does not announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it appears quietly, signaling movement where once there was stasis. The lesson is clear: growth happens for everyone willing to remain open. Part 4. Chapter 46, The Bees. Part 4 opens with a reminder that healing is not a straight line. Progress often feels fragile, easily disrupted by unexpected emotions or setbacks. Lori reflects on how people expect therapy to move steadily forward, when in reality it unfolds in loops, pauses, and regressions. The image of bees becomes a metaphor for anxiety. Just as bees swarm suddenly and feel impossible to control, anxious thoughts arrive uninvited, buzzing loudly in the mind. Therapy does not eliminate these thoughts. Instead, it teaches people how to respond differently, to stay grounded rather than panic. This chapter reinforces a core lesson: feeling better does not mean never feeling bad again. It means knowing how to handle discomfort when it returns. Chapter 47, Kenya. A trip to Kenya provides perspective beyond the therapy room. Stepping outside familiar routines allows Lori to observe herself more clearly. Distance from daily life creates space for reflection. In Kenya, Lori confronts both beauty and hardship. She sees lives shaped by circumstances vastly different from her own, which challenges her sense of control and entitlement. The experience does not minimize her pain, but it reframes it. This chapter explores how perspective does not erase suffering, it contextualizes it. Growth often comes from expanding our view of the world beyond ourselves. Chapter 48. Psychological Immune System. Lori introduces the idea of a psychological immune system, the mind's ability to adapt to difficult circumstances over time. People consistently underestimate their capacity to recover from loss. Patients often believe that certain experiences will permanently break them. Therapy helps them recognize their resilience, not through denial, but through lived proof. This chapter emphasizes that humans are far more adaptable than they imagine. Pain changes us, but it does not have to destroy us. Chapter 49. Counseling versus Therapy. Here, Lori draws an important distinction. Counseling focuses on advice and problem solving. Therapy focuses on insight, patterns, and emotional truth. While advice can be useful in moments of crisis, it does not create lasting change. Therapy asks deeper questions. Why do these problems keep repeating? What role do I play in them? This chapter clarifies why therapy can feel uncomfortable. It does not simply offer solutions. It challenges identity. Chapter 50, Datsila. Anticipatory grief dominates this chapter. When someone we love is dying, fear expands beyond reason, becoming overwhelming and all-consuming. Lori explores how people attempt to manage this fear through hypervigilance, control, or emotional withdrawal. None of these strategies work. Therapy offers a different approach, allowing grief to exist without letting it dominate every moment. Naming fear reduces its power. Chapter 51, Dear Myron. Unspoken words weigh heavily on the psyche. This chapter centers on the idea that unresolved conversations continue long after the opportunity to speak has passed. Writing becomes a therapeutic act. Letters that are never sent allow patients to articulate feelings they could not express aloud. This chapter emphasizes that closure does not require response. It requires expression. Chapter 52, Mothers. The relationship between mothers and children shapes emotional life in profound ways. Lori examines how attachment, expectations, and unmet needs echo into adulthood. Patients struggle with conflicting feelings: love, resentment, loyalty, anger. Therapy provides permission to hold these contradictions without judgment. Understanding maternal relationships allows patients to separate who they are from who they were expected to be. Chapter 53, The Hug. A simple hug becomes a powerful symbol. Physical connection communicates safety in ways words cannot. This chapter explores how appropriate, compassionate touch can ground people in moments of distress. It also addresses how deprived many adults are of genuine, comforting connection. Healing often happens through presence rather than explanation. Chapter 54, Don't Blow It. Fear of loss can sabotage happiness. When things finally begin to feel good, people brace for disaster. Lori explains how anxiety convinces people to withhold joy as a form of protection. Therapy challenges this belief, encouraging patients to fully inhabit positive moments. Avoiding joy does not prevent pain, it only reduces life. Chapter 55. It's my party and you'll cry if you want to. Grief does not follow social rules. This chapter affirms that there is no correct way to mourn. Suppressing emotion for the comfort of others often deepens suffering. Therapy gives permission to feel openly, even when it disrupts expectations. Authentic expression becomes an act of self-respect. Chapter 56. Happiness is sometimes. Lori dismantles the myth that happiness is a permanent state. Happiness is episodic, not continuous. Expecting constant happiness leads to disappointment and self-blame. Therapy reframes happiness as something that appears, disappears, and returns. This chapter invites acceptance of emotional fluctuation as a normal part of being human. Chapter 57. Wendell. Wendell steps fully into focus as a person, not just a therapist. Lori reflects on his quiet influence and the subtle ways he has shaped her growth. This chapter reminds us that healing often comes through relationship rather than technique. Chapter 58. A pause in the conversation. The book closes not with resolution, but with continuation. Therapy does not end life's challenges, it equips people to face them differently. A pause in the conversation is not an ending. It is space for integration. Growth remains ongoing, unfinished, and deeply human. Maybe you should talk to someone reminds us that therapy isn't about becoming someone new, it's about becoming more fully yourself. We don't change alone. We change in relationship. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is sit down, tell the truth, and let someone listen.